Day going. Perfect timing. Good morning, everybody. I figure I should start with an introduction. My name is Kyle Barrowman. I'm a film studies student from Chicago, Illinois, if you're wondering about the accent. I'm here on a scholarship doing a PhD with Professor Bowman on movie and martial arts stuff. And I'm here today to talk to you about Inception and philosophy. Now, for a little teaser about what today's going to be, I should start off by saying, despite my youthful appearance and boyish good looks and the fact that I'm part of a technological generation, I'm not technologically savvy. So I don't have a flashy PowerPoint or a Prezi for you. The most visual stimulation you're going to get today is me. I know, you're welcome. And I know that's risky starting off with an arrogance joke, a strange American person you never met before. I'm risking confirming some stereotypes, but life's more fun when there's risk. So what I'm going to put up on the screen for you throughout the lecture are basically just the quotes that I'm going to be dealing with and that I'm going to be unpacking. You don't have to worry about furiously scribbling them down verbatim. You don't have to take pictures. I'll email this to you, and I have the quotes there with nice sources, so you don't have to do any of that work if you end up writing about this. So pretty much, you're just going to listen to me talk for a while. I know that sounds very boring. Hopefully, you'll be able to stay awake. And towards the end, we'll start to shift more towards Inception. At the beginning, I'm going to front load this with the ideas that we're going to be dealing with. And I'm going to kind of flip the order that Professor Bowman usually does. He usually does a shorter first half and then a little bit of a longer second half. I'm going to flip that, so you're going to have to stay with me for a little while. And then we'll take a break and we'll come back and we'll start to move more towards Inception, and then we'll carry that through in the seminars. So if, as I'm talking, I tend to talk fast and I get really excited and into stuff. So if stuff isn't making sense to you or you have questions that come up, just jot down a note, and then the first thing we'll do in the seminars is, that was confusing, can you explain that again? That didn't make any sense, can you explain it differently? That'll be the first order of business. So, already in this module, Professor Bowman has introduced you to various philosophical ideas, philosophical concepts, and philosophers. But this week is the first and only pure philosophy week. And it might seem like a strange order, but I think it actually works very nicely. You've had 2 weeks now to be introduced to two different paradigms. That was a key word that Professor Bowman introduced. We're going to look at two different paradigms, first psychoanalysis and second Marxism/postmodernism. Now today, when you're dealing with philosophy, that'll help you to both understand the ideas that we're talking about and sort of look back and understand a little bit better the mechanisms of thought that are going into the construction of those types of paradigms. And you can more critically engage with them and see, that doesn't really make sense, but I understand why they're saying it now, or that makes perfect sense, and now I get why they're saying that. And then you'll be able to carry those tools through with you the rest of this module. But I should, if I cough, I'm still getting over a cold, that's going to be an annoying sound. I apologize. I should also note that what I have to say and the philosophical position from which I'm going to say it is fundamentally antithetical to Professor Bowman's. If we had like a nice little map and the two of us were on one side, every single thing down the line would be opposite. We disagree on everything. So that's kind of going to be the fun of this, where I'm going to give you some different ideas and different and opposing takes on some of the things you've already heard, and that'll give you sort of a better sense of the vast intellectual landscape, and you'll be able to sort of play things off each other and kind of make up your own minds, because that's ultimately what it's going to come down to. You can say, yeah, Professor Bowman's totally right on this one. No, Kyle's right on this one. So you can do that throughout the module, and then ultimately when you're writing the papers, you can say, okay, this is what everybody said, these are what the people I've read said, this is what these people standing in front of me said, now this is what I think. So, having said that, let's get the lecture proper going. Originally, I had a completely different introduction to this lecture, but over the weekend, I was on YouTube, as one is when one's supposed to be working, and I watched an awesome video that blew my mind, and I have to share the joy, so I'm going to start by blowing your minds. You might have heard the name Alan Watts before. Alan Watts is probably the most famous 20th century British philosopher, certainly in the celebrity sense. He's famous for a lot of ideas. Mostly he's famous for popularizing Eastern ideas in Western context. But for all of his achievements, for all of the ideas, I was shocked that he basically came up with the idea of Inception. And I apologize, technology hasn't been my friend today. That thing won't come down, so hopefully the glare isn't too obnoxious. Let's check this out.
I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream at night any dream you wanted to dream. And you would, of course, be able to alter your time sense and slip, say, 75 years of subjective time into 8 hours of sleep. You would, I suppose, start out by fulfilling all your wishes. You could design for yourself what would be the most ecstatic life. Love affairs, banquets, dancing girls, wonderful journeys, gardens, music beyond belief. And then after a couple of months of this sort of thing, at 75 years a night, you would be getting a little taste for something different. And you would move over to an adventurous dimension, where there were sudden dangers involved, and the thrill of dealing with dangers. And you could rescue princesses from dragons, and go on dangerous journeys, make wonderful explosions and blow them up, eventually get into contest with enemies. And after you've done that for some time, you'd think up a new wrinkle to forget that you were dreaming, so that you would think it was all for real, and to be anxious about it, because it'd be so great when you woke up. And then you say, well, like children who dare each other on things, how far out could you get? What could you take? What dimension of being lost, of abandonment of your power, what dimension of that could you stand? You could ask yourself this because you know you'd eventually wake up. And after you've gone on doing this, you see, for some time, you would suddenly find yourself sitting around in this room with all your personal involvements, problems, etc., talking with me. How do you know that that's not what you're doing? Could be. Because after all, what would you do if you were God? If you were what there is, the self. In the Upanishads, the basic texts of Hinduism, one of them starts out saying, in the beginning was the self. And looking around, it said, I am. And thus it is that everyone to this day, when asked who is there, says it is I. If you were God, and in the sense that you knew everything, you would be bored. Because if, looking at it from another way, we push technology to its furthest possible development, and we had, instead of a dial telephone on one's desk, a more complex system of buttons, and one touch would give you anything you wanted, Aladdin's lamp, you would eventually have to introduce a button labeled surprise. Because all perfectly known futures, as I pointed out, are past. They have happened, virtually. It is only the true future is a surprise. So if you were God, you would say to yourself, man, get lost.
All right. That's pretty crazy to me. That's insane. He died when Christopher Nolan was like 3 or 4. That's just, this is kind of to set up the fact that the philosophical ideas that Inception deals with and the way that Christopher Nolan sort of steps in and throws his hat into the ring, we're covering a very, very vast terrain of ideas. and start off dealing with some of them and then bring you back to this. So keep this in the back of your mind as I'm talking. Let this kind of frame the trajectory of this lecture. So, I mentioned at the start that we're talking about Inception and philosophy. Now, when I say philosophy, that is a hell of a lot of ground to cover. What I'm really going to do is kind of give you a little crash course in modern philosophy. And when you say modern philosophy, if you're dealing with that, you have to start with René Descartes. Descartes literally changed the game. And we're coming up on half a millennium since he published Meditations on First Philosophy in 1641. And the little card games the philosophers play today, they're still playing with a Cartesian deck. So we're going to deal with, in this first part of the lecture, what's basically the most influential philosophical text of the last 400 years, Meditations. For a little background, Descartes was part of an old school of intellectuals where there's not much specialization. They kind of had their mental hands in everything. So Descartes was a scientist, he was a mathematician, and a philosopher. We're dealing with Descartes, the philosopher today. He started out in 1637, he wrote something called the Discourse on Method, and it's like a mini book form preface to the way he thinks and the way he does stuff. So once he wrote that, he set out to write the Meditations. The Meditations is kind of like a diary or like a personal therapy session as he goes through and sort of enters his own mind and tries to see, how do I actually think stuff? And the reason he wanted to do that is because as a mathematician, as a scientist, it always bothers him when he'll come up with like a proof or something, and then someone will doubt him, or someone will think he's wrong. Or even worse, if he's going through an experiment and he finds out that he was wrong about something. He was so certain about this. How the hell could he have been wrong? And if he's wrong about this, maybe he's wrong about everything. How do you really know what you know or don't know? And how do you know that you don't know that? That's just, it's a rabbit hole that we've all experienced at one time or another. And he kind of wanted to go through that step by step to essentially close the book on what's known as skepticism. Now, in everyday usage, skepticism kind of means two things. Usually people know it in what's more accurately called scientific skepticism. That type of skepticism can be healthy. That's the kind of thing where someone just comes up and tells you something, you don't just immediately go, okay, that's 100% true, and then go on and live your life with that. You kind of step back and say, okay, how do you know that? Who told you that? Can you show me that that's true? That's a kind of like step back skepticism. That's okay. Philosophical skepticism is not healthy, and that will lead to insanity. And that's what we're going to be dealing with today. Philosophical skepticism casts doubt on everything. Philosophical skepticism means I don't believe any of your claims to knowledge. I don't believe you can know anything, and neither can I. Of course, that then leads you to the paradox that I know nothing, and that's ridiculous. That's why skepticism is nonsense, but getting ahead of myself a little bit there. Descartes wanted to close the book on that. It's like, no more of this crap. Just leave me alone. This is why I'm right. This is why I know all this stuff. Now let's get down to the business of math and science and figuring things out. But the bitter irony is that his legacy, if you go on Google and you type in Cartesian, and then you have one of those browsers that suggests things for you, there's a reason it doesn't say Cartesian certainty or Cartesian awesomeness. There's a reason it says Cartesian skepticism. The reason skepticism is his legacy is because as he was going through, he realized that, fuck, this is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. I can't get rid of this thing. And he started to kind of realize that maybe skepticism isn't something out there or something that someone does to me. Maybe it's inside and I have to keep dealing with this shit. That's kind of the trajectory of the Meditations. Now, the Meditations is structured in 6 kind of chapters of his personal story. We're not going to go through all 6 of them, but you can, and I recommend you do. It's fun following his train of thought. We're going to focus on the first 2 meditations. So, we're going to start some of the quotes. So we're going to run through sort of the logical trajectory of Descartes' thinking through the first 2 meditations. And this is the place, okay, it actually does look big, you can read that in the back. So this is the place from which Descartes begins. I am here quite alone, and at last I will devote myself sincerely and without reservation to the general demolition of my opinions. To accomplish this, it will not be necessary for me to show that all my opinions are false. It'll be enough if I find in each of them at least some reason for doubt. Now keep that last little phrase in mind. He's starting off in a pretty sensible place. It's very rational. If you can come up with an argument for some things being false, if you can come up with what's known as reasonable doubt, hence that idiomatic expression, beyond a reasonable doubt. If you have a reason for doubting, then you should investigate further and make sure that you're actually right. Very quickly, he just starts doubting for the sake of doubting and goes into this arbitrary hell and just falls down a rabbit hole of insanity. And that's what a lot of philosophers have done in his wake, and we'll see some of that and some of the consequences. But at the start, he's very rational. And his favorite analogy to sort of explain his method is he would always tell people, imagine that you have a basket of apples. You go to pull one out and you notice it's rotten. Shit, now what? How do you know that they're not all rotten? Well, you dump it out on the table and then you go through. That one's rotten, that goes in the bin. This one's good, we'll put this back in the basket. So then by the end, you got a basket of nothing but good apples. That's what Descartes wanted to do. He kind of wanted to dump out the apples inside his head and make sure there weren't any rotten. If I can modify that analogy a little bit, when you do that, when you dump out your basket of apples, you don't also rip apart the basket and break it down to its molecular structure. The basket is what's known in philosophy as axioms. And Descartes wanted to find his axioms. The title of his book is Meditations on First Philosophy. What he was trying to find was the first principle. He wanted to go through all doubt, all bullshit, get rid of all the stupid stuff, and hit bedrock and say, this is my first principle. Doesn't matter, I can fuck up here. But if I have this, if I have the foundation, then I can build a solid, rational philosophy. So for his example of sort of taking an idea that he's just, of course it's right. I don't have to doubt that. His first example, his most famous example, of taking an idea that he'd taken for granted and starting to see, oh shit, maybe that's not true. His first example is a fitting one, given we're talking about Inception. His first example is dreams. So he says, at the moment, my eyes are certainly wide awake when I look at this piece of paper. I shake my head, and it is not asleep. As I stretch out and feel my hand, I do so deliberately, and I know what I am doing. All this would not happen with such distinctness to someone asleep. Indeed, as if I did not remember other occasions when I have been tricked by exactly similar thoughts while asleep. As I think about this more carefully, I see plainly that there are never any sure signs by means of which being awake can be distinguished from being asleep. Okay, that is a scary thought. If that's true, then what the hell are we doing here? You can't know anything. You might be sleeping right now. But do we actually buy that? I don't. And if we go back to an example like last week, let's remember the Matrix. Professor Bowman showed you that clip last week where Morpheus takes Neo into the construct. As soon as they get in there, just white background, Neo's freaking out. He's basically where Descartes is now. As soon as they get in there, the first thing that happens, right now we're in a computer program? That's a horrible impersonation, but Keanu Reeves is like one of the worst actors to ever be like a thing. And I felt so bad for Lawrence Fishburne. Incredible casting as Morpheus, but he had to carry that idiot for 3 movies. Anyway, so Neo just comes in, right now we're in a computer program? What's the first thing Morpheus says? Is it really so hard to believe? The very first thing he does is find the sure signs. The very first thing he does is distinguish between one level and another. You're not bald anymore. You don't have a giant hole in the back of your head. You don't have holes everywhere from the weird bath pod thing machines put you in. That was the very first thing that happens, is you distinguish between them. Descartes did not have Morpheus's peace of mind. He was losing his shit. Descartes goes through the dream example here, and then he continues to go throughout the first meditation, and he comes to this point. I have no answer to these arguments, and I'm finally compelled to admit that there is not one of my former beliefs about which a doubt may not properly be raised. And this is not a flippant or ill-considered conclusion. Yes, but it's based on powerful and well-thought-out reasons. No, it's not. Throughout his journey down this skeptical rabbit hole, there's one idea that he hasn't gotten rid of yet. There's one idea that he's constantly drawn to. He can't help but be drawn towards the concept of God. In his exact words, firmly rooted in my mind is the long-standing opinion that there is an omnipotent God. Descartes was a religious guy, and the third meditation is about the proof of God. But if he's going down this rabbit hole, he has to doubt even that. How do I know that there's a God? He's got to even get rid of that fundamental belief. Here's where that leads him. I will suppose, therefore, that not God, who is supremely good and the source of truth, but rather some malicious demon of the utmost power and cunning has employed all his energies in order to deceive me. I shall think that the sky, the air, the earth, colors, shapes, sounds, and all external things are merely the delusions of dreams, which he has devised to ensnare my judgment. Even if it is not in my power to know any truth, I shall at least do what is in my power, that is, resolutely guard against assenting to any falsehood, so that the deceiver, however powerful and cunning he may be, will be unable to impose on me in the slightest degree. So, to my eyes, he hasn't rejected the concept of God. He can't do that. All he's done here is say, well, maybe God's not good. Maybe he's an asshole and he's just tricking me up there. And he's got the little puppet strings. And basically, think back to the logic of the Matrix, that's the evil demon argument. When Descartes hit this point and conjured up this little thought experiment with the evil demon, he basically opened philosophy's Pandora's box. And we haven't been able to close that since. So you see all kinds of variants of the evil demon in political theory and aesthetic theory, everywhere. For the most obvious example, the Matrix. You have the machines, they're powerful and cunning. They can create a weird computer program. They can stick a giant thing in the back of your head and make you believe that you're in the Matrix. And they can suck electrical energy out of you somehow. They're that powerful, they're that cunning. But if you're actually working through the logic of this, it kind of doesn't make any sense. Descartes has to put a little back door into the scenario to make sure that he's kept his mind inside of his head. And the same thing happens in the Matrix, and the same thing happens with Marxism. So you can see this type of, in my opinion, poor logic at work in the Matrix and in Marxism. Descartes says this thing, this demon, the utmost power, it is omnipotent. It's not powerful enough to deceive me. What sense does that make? If he's the utmost power, what, somehow I can't know any truth, but I can stop from believing falsehoods? How can you distinguish a falsehood from a deception? How do you know that he's not deceiving you and tricking you into making you think that's false, and then you withhold your assent, and hey, you won, he deceived you? That doesn't actually make any sense. And the same thing happens in the Matrix. How did Neo get out of the Matrix? He didn't unplug himself. Can't do that. The evil demon's too powerful. You don't know you're in the Matrix. Morpheus yanked him out. How did Morpheus get out? There's like 10 seconds of lip service of him saying, the first guy who showed us. How the hell did that guy get out? Either that guy somehow unplugged himself, which makes no sense, or they built the Matrix, but they forgot about that dude, and there had to be a little back door. If you have suffered through the subsequent installments of the Matrix, you know that's kind of where they go. He was the anomaly. So yeah, nice little back door, but it doesn't make your idea make any more sense. Same thing happens in Marxist theory. If you remember back to last week when we were dealing with Althusserian ideology, what is that but a variant of the evil demon argument? Professor Bowman was talking about how you tend to have two different conceptions of false consciousness or ideology. You have the idea of evil people standing up here, usually rich, old, fat, white dudes who have a ton of money and are making you all stay poor so they can get richer. But the basic idea, I'm up here, I can brainwash you, I can control you, and I'm so powerful and good at it that you don't actually know what's happening. That's Althusser's conception of ideology. Okay, so how's he able to write a theory like that, talking about how we need to be down with the system? How does he have a space to even notice that he's being deceived if the evil demon is as powerful as he says it is? This is the same type of problem. At least it's something called an infinite regress. But if this is so stupid, then what the hell is he doing? Why is he wasting his time? The interesting thing to keep in mind that 400 years, so many people don't notice this. He's not saying this is true. This is a thought experiment. He's just working through stuff and allowing doubts to come up just so that he's able to hit a good foundation. But so many people just read the meditation and go, fuck, there's an evil demon, I don't know what the hell's going on. And then they create all these silly ideas. It's like, hey, calm down. Let's go back, keep following Descartes. He's okay. So as he moves on, this is towards the end of the first meditation. The first meditation ends like the worst ending to a movie ever. It's just the bad guy won and you can't do anything about it. The justification for this type of a thought experiment is found in the second meditation. As he goes through all of this craziness, he hits this point. Does it now follow that I too do not exist? How far is this crap going to go? Am I not even real? No. If I convinced myself of something, or thought anything at all, then I certainly existed. But there's a deceiver of supreme power and cunning who's deliberately and constantly deceiving me. In that case, I too undoubtedly exist, if he's deceiving me, and let him deceive me as much as he can. He'll never bring it about that I am nothing. So after considering everything thoroughly, I must finally conclude that this proposition, I am, I exist, is necessarily true. I think, therefore I am. Everybody in this room's heard that before. It doesn't actually appear in that form in the Meditations on First Philosophy. That originally came up in the Discourse on Method, and it comes up later in something I think it's called Principles of Philosophy. But this is the justification going through all the craziness. If there is a demon, let's just grant that stupid crap for argument. If there is an evil demon, and he's deceiving me, I can't doubt that I exist. Otherwise, what the hell's he deceiving? That doesn't make any sense. So yeah, fine, let's grant that. I still exist. And I'm doubting. I'm thinking through this stuff. So I have to be conscious. I have to be aware of this. Something has to be going on inside me that's different from him. Descartes just found his axioms. The axiomatic concepts that he just identified are existence, consciousness, and identity. Stuff has to exist, otherwise this crap is just nonsense. There's the concept of identity because Descartes is different from the evil demon. And the concept of consciousness, he's thinking through this. Consciousness is the faculty of perceiving that which exists. And once your consciousness is doing that and working through that over time, then you are able to have self-consciousness. Once consciousness is pretty good and it's working nice, then you're able to say, there's something in here that's doing this perceiving. There's something in here that's allowing me to be aware. So now, he's a little calmer now. He's a little more confident. He gets to this point in the second meditation. From all this, I am beginning to have a rather better understanding. I see what it is. My mind enjoys wandering off and will not yet submit to being restrained within the bounds of truth. Very well then. Just this once, let us give it a completely free rein, so that after a while, when it is time to tighten the reins, it may more readily submit to being curbed. Now, I personally love this quote. I wish more people would read it and actually pay attention to it. And I want to stay with this quote for a little while. I have just talked very fast and thrown a ton of heavy abstract ideas at you. And I would imagine you're sitting there wondering what the hell this has to do with anything, especially in 2017. We're talking about a dude in 1641. Well, I think we can work through some of these ideas here and apply it to something like politics. So we can think about some of this in relation to the ideas that we were discussing last week. Most of the stuff that you'll be exposed to in university tends to be of a leftist bent. So there's going to be a lot of rhetoric that you should be familiar with. And we talked last week about postmodernism and Marxism. And Professor Bowman talked about how they're kind of linked. And they are. And that's not a historical accident either. Postmodernism is, in my opinion, kind of silly and a little goofy. Postmodernists hate this type of thinking. They hate Cartesian rationality. And it's no wonder. When you think about this in relation to a lot of, particularly Marxist and communist rhetoric type stuff, when you think about that type of rhetoric in relation to this, you never submit. You don't accept restraints. you don't allow anything to be curbed. That's anathema to that type of rhetoric. What kind of justifies that thinking is what's known in philosophy as a false dichotomy. A false dichotomy is when you kind of reduce the field of ideas and you just kind of make two things and say this or that. A false dichotomy means they're not actually mutually exclusive. There's not actually a contradiction here, and there are actually a lot of other options. This type of philosophical thinking leads to a false dichotomy between free will and determinism. Those are your little jargony words for today. The false dichotomy between free will and determinism makes it seem like you need complete freedom. You don't pull the reins on anything, and you don't let anyone try to curb that. That's determinism, and you can't do that, because then you're never going to have a revolution if you allow that stuff. You need freedom. The contrary to that type of logic, there's a guy right now, he's gotten a lot of flack over the last year. He's kind of a controversial dude, but he's very smart, and I would highly recommend checking out a guy named Jordan Peterson on YouTube. I don't know how active you are on Twitter and Facebook and stuff, if you've seen that guy getting yelled at, but he's pretty smart, and he likes to talk about this philosophical idea in relation to games. And in the second half of the lecture, we're going to be dealing with something called ordinary language philosophy. We're going to end up coming into contact with a German philosopher named Ludwig Wittgenstein. And Wittgenstein had the famous expression of language games. He liked to understand language as a kind of game, and thinking as a kind of game. If you use game theory here, Jordan Peterson is a clinical psychologist, and he likes to play a little thought game, and he'll just, I'm not going to do this to any of you here, because when I sat in audiences of students, I fucking hated when people did this, so I'd be a hypocrite if I did it. But he would do something where he would just go up to someone at random and say, I'd like you to play a game with me. And they say, okay. And he says, all right, you go first. And then they just sit there. There's silence, nothing happens. That is postmodernism taken to its logical conclusion. And the justification for that is kind of what Professor Bowman highlighted last week. When he was talking about Althusserian ideology, he pointed out there's a weird problematic deadlock that happens if you try to make an argument like, all of your beliefs, ideological. You've been brainwashed, you're an idiot. My ideas are not ideological. I haven't been brainwashed. I'm brilliant, you should listen to me. Now, someone like me, I can make an argument like that, because I believe in logic and rationality. So I can say, here's my argument, this is why I don't think that's really valid, and then the other person can say, you know what? No, you're wrong. Here's my counter argument. Or you know what? You're right. Your theory is more valid. In postmodernism, someone like Jean-Francois Lyotard, who you saw up on one of Professor Bowman's slides last week, he doesn't really like science. So we kind of get rid of that stupid stuff. And then a guy named Jacques Derrida, who you saw up there last week, he doesn't really like logic. He calls them Western metaphysics. So you get rid of that stuff. When you get rid of science, which is a nice background to ground claims, when you get rid of logic, which is a nice way to kind of structure your thoughts, what are you left with? As a postmodernist, if you're actually following that through, you can't make that little step out to the side argument. You have to accept the fact that all of your beliefs, completely ideological, brainwashed. All of my beliefs, completely ideological, brainwashed. Okay, so what do? How do we kind of run the world out there? How do we decide whose value system or whose ideas to accept? You can't use science to ground that, because that's all bullshit. That's all weird patriarchal construct. What about logic? No. Western metaphysics, that's terrible too. Okay, you got two ways to deal with people. Logic or force. You get rid of logic, all you have are my beliefs, completely ideological. Your beliefs, completely ideological. Do mine. No. Do mine. No, I like mine. I'd have to kill you now. That's kind of it. You're kind of screwed. Now, some people who like postmodernism might say that's a hyperbole and that's a character, and shut the hell up, Kyle. And to be fair, most people don't follow postmodernism through to its logical conclusion. Most people recognize, somewhere in the back of their mind, something they kind of put away in a safe and chose to forget, to use Inception logic here. Most people realize at some point, somewhere in their head, okay, we can't do that, that's stupid, it's just going to lead to nothing at best, or annihilation at worst. So, Professor Bowman talked about how postmodernism and Marxism, they're kind of linked. Yeah, there's a reason for that. Because if you're a postmodernist, and you don't want to hit that clash point where nothing happens, or just crazy death happens, well, you can't bring capitalism in because everybody knows capitalism is the worst thing that man has ever thought of and it's the biggest evil in the universe. So you just do Marxism again. Now, why do you need that link? Historically speaking, once we got to the 1970s, you couldn't actually be a Marxist anymore and pretend to also be a person. You just couldn't. When it came out that 30 million people died thanks to Stalin, and like 60 million people died thanks to Mao, you can't come out and say, yeah, I'm a Marxist, and it's totally awesome. No. Nobody in 1946 was running around Germany saying, I'm a Nazi, and it's awesome. No, you can't do that. So all the people who came up in the 60s and 70s, particularly in the French intellectual scene, they all became postmodernists because they can't be Marxist anymore. So then they kind of change the language and say, all right, it's not bourgeois versus proletariat anymore. Because if I say that, you're going to know I'm a Marxist. So let's kind of change it. Let's just say oppressor versus oppressed. And then we'll kind of just do what became identity politics. We'll just kind of do that and just kind of go, Marxism, Marxist. Is it okay? They call themselves postmodernists for a while. Now we're at the point where, yeah, I'm a Marxist. And all that horrible 100 million people dead and just mass starvation with in Soviet Russia having signs telling adults not to eat your children, and people in Mao's China not walking along sidewalks by tall buildings because people are killing themselves and they don't want someone to land on them. Now it's like, yeah, I'm a Marxist. It's kind of cool. So there's a link between postmodernism and Marxism. And that is from skepticism. Descartes opened that freaking Pandora's box, and that's how you get stuff like this. I don't believe in science. I don't believe in your claims. I doubt that. So I'm going to be a little postmodernist. I don't really believe in that. I think it's subjective. I think it's arbitrary. I don't believe in objective knowledge. I don't believe you can know things. That's skepticism. That comes out of these types of dilemmas. And in 1641, Descartes kind of noticed that. If we think back to Inception, there's the idea that if an idea gets lodged in your head, it can come to define you or destroy you. You don't know which. You can't know that. Descartes wasn't planning on fucking with people's heads and making everybody skeptical. But that's sort of what happened. And how does that happen? Why does that happen? In the fourth meditation, Descartes deals with a distinction between what he calls the intellect and the will. That's kind of what this is getting at. The mind likes to wander off. Don't tell me about logic. I like this better. Don't tell me that I gotta kill myself in my limbo dream. I made all these fancy buildings. Just let me stay here. That's that type of logic. So this is the problem that Descartes recognized, but he didn't really know how to solve it. He didn't really know what to do. He's pretty cool. He's pretty confident. I got my axioms. I know I'm conscious. I know I exist. I can go back and doing my math and science. But what about everybody else? It doesn't really work the way I thought it would. People are still going to be skeptical. They still have to deal with this shit. And the last line of the meditation, the very last thing Descartes says, he says, it must be admitted that in this human life, we are often liable to make mistakes about particular things, and we must acknowledge the weakness of our nature. That's kind of glass half empty. That's a little depressing. That's kind of a shitty way to end 60 pages. That's not really that fun. He ends up at that point, yeah, I'm really smart. You guys know I'm really smart, but we're weak. We don't really know shit. We kind of suck. That opens the door to so many other philosophies and philosophers throughout the centuries. That opens the door for someone like Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant was a German philosopher in the 1700s. Kant came up with the famous distinction between phenomena and noumena, which is just a fancy way of saying the way things appear to us and the way things are in themselves. And Kant's argument was, because like Descartes said, we're weak and we can fuck shit up, we can't ever really know things in themselves. All we can know are the way things appear to us. So Kant's basic argument is, we can never know anything because we're human. That's another shitty-ass argument. It's a horrible way to end. So this opens the door to a lot of different types of philosophies that end up being overwhelmed by skepticism. So what do you do? How do you get out of that? If I ended the second part of this lecture on that horrible downbeat note, you would hate me. But in the second half, we'll have a little bit of a more positive spin, and we'll deal with what's known as pragmatism and ordinary language philosophy. Now, your heads are probably spinning. You would probably like a break. So I'd say 11:50 right now. How about we take 10 minutes and we recover from Descartes' skepticism, and then we come back and try to figure out if we have any strength and if humans are actually worth anything.